The word contrarian is bandied around, not least by himself, but I believe there is a tough-minded consistency in his output over the decades. I have a personal experience of this because he was the only close friend I knew back in the early 80s who supported the Falklands invasion. The rest of us were dead against. He did so on the basis of national sovereignty, but not only that. He predicted that an invasion would lead to the breakup of the odious regime of General Galtieri, and as it turned out, he was right. I should say, while we're back in that period, that he's the only non-cabinet member I know to have his bottom smacked in public by Mrs. Thatcher. You remember it well?
Yes, the old wound still troubles me sometimes.
Yep. Since then, he's hardly been able to sit down. He's not one of those blogging citizens of the armchair. He's expended real shoe leather in a great variety of war zones, as well as zones of poverty and repression. He's been a drinking friend of good standing with Kosovar as well as Kurdish fighters, and he's been in and out of the Congo, Iran, Iraq, and many other places, and notably North Korea. And I think you know what a boiled dog tastes like. A little bit like chicken, no doubt. He's fought the cause of Cyprus, has argued all his life for the return of the Elgin marbles. In the days of the Soviet Union, he was a scathing denouncer of its methods and governance. I'll never forget, there's one particular essay describing his arrest in Prague by the secret police when he was in the company of various distinguished Charter 77 activists. The title of that essay was enough to impel you towards it. It was called Cretinismo Eroico, from Gramsci. Yeah. He's written superbly well on Kipling, Orwell, Wodehouse, Bellow, War, Auden, among 1,000 others. On the Anglo-US relations, I think that his collection, Blood, Class and Nostalgia, is one of the finest collections of political essays in existence. He's been a staunch and ingenious supporter of Salman Rushdie, whose 60th birthday it is today, and crowds are stirring in various parts of the world against his knighthood. And he's written superbly on Tom Paine and Thomas Jefferson. He's been an implacable opponent of nuclear weapons and has argued long and hard against the monarchy. And by a method of divine right in reverse, now addresses himself to God. So welcome, Christopher Hitchens. So, Christopher,
do you have a copy of that?
It'll cost you a bit. This is not a metaphysical question, but why are we here? I mean, why are so many people here? I was in Central Hall 2 months ago for a debate on religion. You were one of 6 speakers, packed to the rooftop. I mean, I sat maybe 400 yards from where you spoke, right up in the roof, in the gods. And it seems to be an extraordinary thing. Darwin's natural selection accepted amazingly rapidly within a generation in late Victorian Britain. Many of the arguments we're now having, and that you pose and deal with, would have been familiar to Voltaire, to Samuel Butler, to Bertrand Russell. So I have a feeling that if we'd called this meeting 10 years ago, there might be just us and the organizers. What has happened?
Well, I think there may be what the Germans call a Tendenswende, or what we normally call, again speaking German, a zeitgeist change, in that the same has happened every stop I've made on the book tour in the United States, starting, as I insisted on doing, not conventional book tour, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Who the fuck is that? We know where your children go to school, anyway.
No, it's God.
As I said, I wanted to start in the South, the states of the old Confederacy. We started in Arkansas, North Carolina, Georgia, Texas, Louisiana, and so on. Huge crowds at every stop, and generally very friendly, too. Often finding, each of them, that they weren't the only atheist in town, as they might have thought up till then. Well, I think it's fairly easy to guess why. In the United States, for example, annoyed at the attempt to teach stultifying creationism to their children. It means their state gets laughed at, their kid is going to not be taken seriously if they apply for a science course at a university of any repute. They don't want this. They don't like it when, amid the collapsing scenery of his presidency, Mr. Bush keeps saying, God bless America, as if that was going to make any difference, or says, well, I know Vladimir Putin must be a good guy, some KGB hood, because he's wearing a crucifix around his neck from his grandmother. Looked into his eyes, knew he must be a good egg. Creationism again. Or that Islam is a religion of peace. In a strong field, the stupidest thing the president has ever said. And then look at, then just, in a sense, open your newspaper. Look what the parties of God between them are doing to Iraq, trying to reduce it to a Somalia or Afghanistan beggary and misery and nothingness. The last two countries where the parties of God had it all their own way. And then the fear that many intelligent people have had for a very long time, that one day a messianic group or regime will get hold of an apocalyptic weapon. Well, that's nearly already happened in Pakistan, currently roiled about the knighthood given to our friend, and is about to happen in Iran, and to some extent is involved in the Israeli acquisition of nuclear weapons, where crazed settlers on the West Bank hope to bring on the Messiah in their own way. And their best friends in America, to return to where I started, are the nutbags who want to teach creationism and if they felt strong enough to forbid the teaching of Darwinism altogether. So it's time for a pushback to all this stupidity and clerical bullying, and I'm rather glad that that one has been matched with this hour, because I think it is important for every generation to have to fight this battle. And we'd been taking it for granted. We thought we could live the secular life, take our benefits from the Enlightenment as if they were our birthright, as it were. Well, there comes a time when you realize it's not just your living. It is my living, but it's also, I would say without, I hope, too much embarrassment, it's also my life. It's what I care about. It's what it's everything to me. All right, I'm very proud to be able to fight for it.
Have we Europeans somewhat overestimated American religious belief? Do you think it's rather overplayed here? Is a strain of atheism, and it's a deeply scientific culture as well, we know, that we haven't been paying attention?
Oh, yeah, it is. Look, whenever any of my English journalist colleagues, I mean, I'm American now, but I mean, if you like, my fellow Brits, former fellow Brits, in Washington can't think of a story to write, it's dead easy to write one about the Christian right. I mean, it writes itself. And they do that, and other Europeans do it too. And the Fulwells, the late Fulwell, about whom I said at a huge meeting in a church in North Carolina the day he died, if he could have been given an enema, he could have been buried in a shoebox. And there was a short silence, and I thought, now I know, now I have to know I've gone too far now. No, the short pause was a prelude to a gigantic storm of roof-raising applause. They can't stand being identified with him down there. And why should they be? These people are not peasants. Very smart and humorous and gentle, welcoming people. Part of my case. So these people are, in a sense, good copy, and they're used by the Democratic Party to scare Jewish voters into giving money. They keep saying, give us all your money, or the Christians are going to come and make your kids celebrate Easter, which they used to do. It's a memory in every Jewish family, but it's diminishing returns. It's a very plural country, and when you challenge a Baptist preacher, as I've done about 50 times in the last month, okay, you say you're a Baptist. Do you believe in Calvin and predestination? Do you think I'm going to hell or anyone's going to hell? It's not because they feel it's inhospitable in the South to say, well, you are for a start. Yeah. They don't like the question. They don't want to. And then I say, well, on what authority do you not believe it? They weren't expecting that. They wanted to know on what authority I thought they did believe it. And they're not sure. Ask a Catholic, does he believe in the virgin birth? Guy said yes, on a radio station. I do. First one I found. He said, I believe in the Immaculate Conception of Jesus. I said, no, you've got it wrong. The Immaculate Conception is of the Virgin Mary. It's not the virgin birth and the Immaculate Conception, two quite different things. And the Immaculate Conception doctrine dates from 1860, by the way, as a Catholic dogma. He had no idea. It's come to something when I have to tell these fuckers what they believe.
Let's get into the beginning of your book. This is Genesis.
Or what they don't believe on, yeah.
So, Christopher, the 9-year-old Hitch.
Picture, if you will. Yeah.
Short trousers. Never seen you in short trousers. Jug-eared. Trailing his teacher, Mrs. Watts, along the hedgerows of the West Country on nature rambles. And your moment on the road to Damascus comes when she tells you that the countryside is green because it is the color most restful to the eye.
Yes.
Without knowing much about the arguments from design, this is the beginning of your conversion to, I won't say atheism, and anti-theism.
Isn't it funny how we have to use religious language even when we're arguing against it? In other words, you select the metaphor of Damascus and you even say conversion and so on. We are, in a sense, conscripted into this, but of course I knew nothing about chlorophyll then, or photosynthesis, let alone the double helix or DNA or anything, this kind of thing. Nobody did about that, or the arguments from design. I just knew that she got it wrong. In fact, got it exactly wrong. The adaptation of the eye is the other way around. And how I knew it, I don't know. But it wasn't a conversion or a Damascene moment at all. It was a moment of realizing not what I didn't believe, but what I did. I mean, that's when I didn't become an atheist. I just realized that I was one. And I think you told me this. There's some work in the neuroscientific world, about which you know much more than I do, about the number of people, it's now estimated, who can't believe, are so made that they're not wired for it. Mm. You said the proportion was quite high.
It's rising, reassuringly, but you know.
Well, would it be rising, or would it be a permanent thing? I defer to you. But
at any rate, I honestly don't know.
At any rate, I know that the psalmist addresses the fools who believe there's no God. So they knew there were such people, even then, in the Bronze Age of the desert religions. Blaise Pascal addresses his pensée to the one who is so made that he cannot believe. That's me. And of course, when you're 9, you think you're the only one, and you wonder if you're a freak. You have other reasons to wonder about that too. Think maybe it's true. But as you get older, you meet tons of people who've always felt the same way, and then you know.
You tell the story, almost a joke, really. Belfast roadblock.
Yes.
Car stops. The driver is asked, Catholic or Protestant? And he says, no, atheist. And
are you a Protestant atheist or a Catholic atheist? Yeah, it happened to a friend of mine.
Well,
a Jewish communist friend of mine had that happen.
But you are clearly a Protestant atheist.
Yes, I have to say.
You know your Bible.
Yeah. King James Bible.
You love the King James Bible. Religion has at least brought you that great piece of literature.
Without the King James version of the Bible and the Cranmer prayer book and quite a lot of the English hymnal, without which I think no one, without an acquaintance with which, I don't think anyone can say that they are literate, because these are great literary works and came, in the King James case, at almost exactly the same time as Shakespeare was beginning to publish. It wouldn't be easy to read Shakespeare if you didn't know what these resources were. It would be impossible to read Milton. It'd be very difficult to read John Donne or George Herbert. So, look, religion is our first and worst attempt to explain the world. It's what we tried as philosophy and storytelling when we didn't know much, when we didn't know that germs cause disease, when we didn't know that our planet went round the sun instead of the other way around, when we didn't know the planet was round. It's part of our tradition. Everyone has to engage with it. And be learned about it as best they can. Everyone has to decide for themselves whether they think they're here because of the laws of biology or whether they're here because of a divine plan that suggests that the universe was created with them in mind. And I think you can tell quite a lot about somebody as to how self-centered they are on that basis. And I make the view of it plain.
Yeah.
But if I couldn't say, from the book of Job, which Howard Dean, the chairman of the Democratic Party, that's now trying to become as pious as it can to catch up, when asked what his favorite book of the New Testament was, replied staunchly, the book of Job. If it wasn't for the book of Job, where it says, man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. I remember reading that when I was quite young too, and thinking I'll never forget it.
Yes. We'd probably favor more those vaguely secular moments in the Bible. In the book, I mean, man that is born of woman have but a short time to live.
Indeed.
When your father died, you read from St. Paul's epistle to the Philippians. And,
I did.
so this is, in the Republic, according to Hitchens, the Bible classes might still be there.
Oh, they'd have to be there. People would have to be understanding these things.
Compulsorily.
Well, they have to. If they wanted to pass a real exam in literature, they'd have to. Sure, yeah, they certainly would. And they also ought to be told the discrepant versions of the Bible. I mean, of which there are numberless ones now. Well, the Church of England, of course, has dumped the glories of the King James Bible in the Crown in favour of banality, thrown away a pearl richer than all their tribe. Just as the Roman Catholic Church gave up the Tridentine Mass, that was a thing of beauty, at least. Well, it's not my fault that they've done that.
No.
They didn't know the worth of what they had. We could restore that and say, no, this is important, and then you'd have to learn how many different interpretations of it there were. The reason I just returned to the Protestant atheist point, it struck me when I was writing my George Orwell book, that, because he thought the Protestant Revolution was a crucial thing, as of course it was, that if you look at the pattern of 1984, it's about a secret book that only the party has. And it's very clear from Orwell and his struggle to make language plain and intelligible and honest, that for him this is the critical struggle, that Wycliffe and Coverdale and Tyndale were trying to take the secret book away from the inner party and out of a language that only those people knew, and to a level of English where it would be, as the 39 Articles say, understanded of the people. That is a revolutionary thing.
For which they suffered.
For which they suffered, but as a result of which the Church, the Holy Mother Church, the one true Apostolic Church, has never had a monopoly again and can't get it back. Once it doesn't have a monopoly, it's all over. Because once it can be compared with other explanations, the other explanations, however long it takes, will in fact win.
So the Bible survives as literature.
Yeah.
You quote very interestingly the head of one of your chapters from Mill's autobiography. He describes his father, a man who thought of religion as a great moral evil. This comes as some surprise for a figure in the first half of the 19th century. And it thought of religion as the greatest enemy of morality. And religion seemed to require people to do the will of a being on whom it lavishes indeed all the phrases of adulation, but whom in sober truth it depicts as eminently hateful.
Yes.
Now, this seems very close to your own position.
Very.
What is so hateful about this God?
The reason that my subtitle of my book in America is Why Religion Poisons Everything is that it urinates in the most essential well that we have, which is our innate knowledge of right from wrong and our human solidarity. It is said by the religious that we couldn't know how to do a right action or say a right thing unless we were terrified of a celestial dictatorship that watched us while we slept, like a secret policeman, and knew our innermost thoughts and could convict us of thought crime, to revert to Orwell. That's what it says. Now, that's an absolutely loathsome idea that robs the human of all his self or her self-respect. That I can't do or say a right thing for its own sake, because it is good, or avoid it because it's wicked. That I'm condemned to some ghastly relativism, and only obeisance before a celestial dictator could possibly let me know whether murder or perjury or theft was okay. Well, this is an insult. And it involves the slave instinct, the willingness to worship and grovel, that is unfortunately also innate in us, but it promotes that to being something wonderful and desirable. Well, that's wicked in my view. So that's poison right at the root, as is of course, its attempt to repress our sexual nature and to distort that and fill it with guilt and shame, ruining and poisoning another absolutely elemental fact of our existence. And then there's the lie, the big lie. Death is coming. Every human mammal knows it. We're the only species that does. Aha. But maybe an exception can be made in your case. If you'll make the right propitiations, adopt the right postures, sprinkle the right water, take the right wafer, you can beat these odds. That's a stupid bribe. It's wrong to lie. So religion is not amoral, it's immoral. It's positively wicked. Mill didn't say enough about how ghastly it was.
Is the core of this to be found in the Old Testament and Moses and his 10 Commandments? Because you take us through those quite interestingly. I want to hear you just run through those first 4, which are, as you say, a kind of monarchical throat clearing, before we get to...
Well, an absolute a despotic monarchy. Yeah. The first 4 commandments are all about how to grovel to God. There's no moral teaching in them at all.
Thou shalt have no other God.
Yeah, and lots of stuff about that. By the way, it's printed twice in the New Testament, and it's slightly discrepant, but they basically come to the same thing. As of the 2 accounts of the flood, I think, and a lot of other inconsistencies. But essentially, yes, the first 4 are better know who's boss and not have any back chat about that. Then, keep one day for me alone. Well, actually, that's a good thing, and that was adopted by the Labour movement. There should be a day off, but not. I don't think you need divine permission for it. I mean, if you see what I mean, it suggests itself. And was long opposed by the religious, any alleviation from day labour. Then, briefly said, don't kill people. Actually, it does say in Hebrew, thou shalt commit no murder, not thou shalt not. Theft is bad, perjury is bad. That's very important, by the way, not bearing false witness. I always think that's beautiful. Then, your wife and other animals should not be coveted by someone else or someone else's wife and other beasts by you. Now, that's thought crime, you see. You may forbid people from raping or pillaging their wives and cattle, but you can't forbid them from thinking about it or envying those who've got more wives and cattle than they have. That's very significant. It's thought crime. You're condemned for thinking about it, and it is preached by some that to think about it is to do it, which I hope none of you here have ever done. It also abolishes, or would if it could, the spirit of emulation and innovation, which makes progress possible. People actually do need to be envious and jealous to get things done. It's a spur. So that's, I would say, an immoral preachment, with a very sinister implication.
Nothing about rape as it happened.
Nothing about rape, in fact, nothing to condemn. And of course, children are ordered to respect their parents, but parents are not enjoined not to beat or murder their children. In fact, a few paragraphs later, they're told that the children can be killed for insubordination. Then later on, nothing about genocide. Why not? Because it's about to be recommended for the Amalekites. In later verses, the person go and kill them all, including the children, save only the nubile girls. That's an order. So, of course, it's not condemned. Slavery is not condemned. Racism is not condemned. People are to be killed because of their membership of the Amalekite tribe or the Jebusite tribe. That's what marks them for death. And you can take all their land when you've killed them. So ethnic cleansing plus conquest. So this is a revolting piece of work. That's why some early Christians, apparently Marcion was one of the church fathers, did consider trying to start a religion again without the burden of the Old Testament. So why don't we begin anew? Well, but they decided they would saddle themselves with the revolting Mosaic tradition. And this is not a detail, because we're saddled with it ourselves. I mean, in the name of all this stuff, there's an irredentist claim being made to Palestine, which has caused no end of trouble and will carry on doing so. And where there's a fair chance as a result of it that there will be a nuclear exchange, as well as a lot more ethnic cleansing, revenge killing, suicide, murder, and all the rest of it, all in the name of monotheism.
But we get no relief in your account in the New Testament. The New Testament, in your view, exceeds the evil of the Old.
Yes.
I've got 2 questions here. One, I'm surprised to find you a materialist to the core, still retaining your belief in evil. Isn't that just another form of supernatural patterning?
Yeah, I know it is, but I have to make the concession. I can't do without the word. There are psychopathic and sociopathic people who the sociopath doesn't really care about or really understand the existence of other people. The psychopath takes positive pleasure in harming others, being cruel to them. But I think there's a layer beyond that, a sort of surplus value of it, that I've actually, I think, seen happen in my little tours of duty as a foreign correspondent, where people will act in a wicked and cruel and sadistic manner even when it won't do them any good, even when it might bring about their own destruction. They're so much in love with it that that's what they need. You need a word for it. In its insipid form, every liberal knows it because they say, always, usually at election times, well, I'll vote for the lesser evil. They find they need the word, even if they're sort of apotropaically banishing it by
Is there some little hint of the supernatural around this?
No, I don't think so.
Sure.
Though, if you use the argument from design, which I think is a discredited argument, if you looked for the evidence of a creator from design, you'd have an easier time proving the existence of Satan than you would of a divine and benevolent and all-loving God. It'd be far easier to say that this was designed by someone with an extremely unpleasant sense of humor.
Well,
that's what the argument from design people shrink from. They only want it if it works for them. Just as if you say to people who want the creation story taught in school, well, fine, we're just about to accede to your demand. We're going to start teaching the Hindu creation story to all children in America tomorrow. Now, are you happy? I sure am not. Oh, you mean you only wanted your creation story told? Why didn't you say so? We're going to teach that God made the world. We're just going to teach the Hindu version. They don't like it. The argument from design, naturally we'll teach it. We'll teach that the devil made the world. The evidence is all around us. Are you happy now? Not really. These people are total strangers to any concept of intellectual honesty. It's very important to deny them the assumption that they make all the time so blandly that they naturally have morality on their side, even if they aren't right on all things. It's absolutely not true. The converse is in fact the case.
but we think of the New Testament as a refreshing dose of compassion and forgiveness after the terrors of the old.
And we're
Jesus
mistaken.
was surely a good guy. Surely, in the context of his time, a revolutionary document emerged in the compilation of these Gospels. How can it possibly exceed the evil of the old?
In two ways, I think. One is that, though, as we've mentioned, the Old Testament contains instructions for genocide, racism, slavery, ethnic cleansing, and so forth. When the earth is piled onto the forgotten Amalekites, and they're gone, that's it. They're forgotten. They're out of history. There's no mention in the Old Testament of any punishment of the dead or any torture of the dead. It's only in the New Testament that hell is introduced by gentle Jesus, meek and mild. Look it up. You'll find I'm right. There's no mention of hell in the Old Testament, bad as it is. Gentle Nazarene says, if you don't agree with me, my mild and loving preachments, depart from me into universal fire. How mild a preachment is that? I have a nice offer for you. If you follow me, you'll get eternal life. Well, it sounds okay. Yeah, but pay attention. If you don't agree with me, I'll kill you. And that's where the fun will begin. You'll be tortured forever. Well, if that isn't wicked, then nothing is wicked. Incidentally, I mean, it's in a way a distinction without a difference, because the New Testament promises to fulfill the vile prophecies of the Old One. It's supposed to be the completion of it, so it can't very well dissociate itself. And then, even C.S. Lewis points this out. Jesus' preachments are mad. They're insane, unless you accept him as the Son of God. What does he say? Leave everything. Leave your family. Abandon all thought for the morrow. Forget thrift. Forget investment. Forget planting seeds, thinking about the crops. Give it all up. Follow me. That's not moral preaching at all. It's insane. Anyone who listened to it would be destroying themselves, unless they thought the kingdom of heaven was coming in the lifetime of the preacher. It's quite a big wager to be making. It's what his disciples evidently believed, that they'd see him again in their own lifetime. Lewis is, for once, quite honest in saying, if you don't make the assumption that this man can proclaim himself the Son of God, then what he's saying is the ravings of a nutcase, which indeed it is.
Are all religions
And what's moral about saying, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth? Who wants the meek to inherit the earth? It was a thing I used to worry about when I was quite little with Mrs. Watts again. Why do I have to keep calling myself a sheep, Mrs. Watts? I'm not a fucking sheep. A religion that describes its own membership as a flock is in deadly trouble. Shepherds don't look after sheep because they like sheep. Well, actually, some of them do. Not wisely, but too well. They look after them so they can first fleece them and then kill them. What is this? It's not moral preaching. We would not be better off. We're not failing to live up to this. We're being set a standard that's impossible and undesirable to live up to. Christianity is evil rubbish.
Let me...
Scattered but encouraging, of course.
Let me invoke for you then, let me slip into my vicar's togs. I'm crossing the quad of some beautiful cathedral precinct.
Yes.
It's Salisbury or Norwich.
Durham for me.
Okay. I'm on my way to Evensong. It's 5:30. I'm going to read that very piece from Epistle of St. Paul that you read at your father's funeral. Whatsoever things of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise. Beautiful.
Think on those things.
Think on those things. I approve of women in the church. I'm anxious that gays take cloth. I've marched for nuclear weapons. I have outreach programs in Africa, and I no longer think it's proper to convert people. How am I poisoned?
Well, that vindicates my idea of minimal progress, because there are many such people now. A little bland, perhaps, a little insipid, but they are there.
Yeah.
I've been making a challenge to all the religious, every debate I've had, where they'll say things like, well, wasn't Martin Luther King a good egg, sort of thing. We get that a lot. I say, well, or Desmond Tutu, who, if I hadn't been in London last night, I would have been hosting for a dinner in Washington, even though he's a bishop. I'm only now an honorary host for that dinner, but was given him mine, Carol's name. Well, two things. Here's what the challenge says. You have to tell me of an ethical statement made or action taken by a person of faith, claimed to be motivated by faith, that couldn't have been made by a person without, an unbeliever. I haven't yet had anyone come up with an answer. And the second is, if you were going to say that Bishop Tutu is a spiritual leader and that his authority derives from the fact that he's a bishop to do what he did, then how are you going to deny it to the Bishop of Kigali in Rwanda, who used it to advocate genocide? Or the Bishop of Nigeria, who is currently making a schism in the Anglican Church on the basis that a homosexual is not a full human being? If you grant it to one, you have to grant it to them all. Louis Farrakhan's racist crackpot cult is said to get black boys off drugs in prison. Maybe it does. I don't know. Actually, I doubt it, but suppose it did. Jehovah's Witnesses, whose theology is simply vile and evil, apparently held up very well in German concentration camps because they wouldn't join Hitler's army. Come to that, move to the secular, I can introduce you to numerous Stalinists who played heroic self-sacrificing roles in Chile and South Africa in the recent past. But they believed that the future lay in a workers' paradise beyond the Ural Mountains. So their deeds, their actions, their goodwill says nothing, I mean literally absolutely nothing at all about the validity of their doctrine. Surely that's clear to everyone.
If we think of religion as you want us to, as man-made, we seem to be capable of inventing wicked and stupid religion. Is this not a demonstration of how essentially wicked and stupid we are? In other words, is there not at root here an issue of human nature? Rather
Yes.
than religion itself?
Yes.
For which it's simply an expression.
Yes. And we are poorly evolved. Or, let's not, you've actually corrected me on this before, there's no such thing as a poor evolution. You either evolve or you don't. But,
Well,
we can't make a subjective judgment of it. We're evolved
Everything that exists is well evolved.
Haphazardly evolved. You know, we're not too badly evolved, but our prefrontal lobes are still a bit too small. And our adrenaline glands are bigger than we need them to be. You brilliantly summarized, Ian has summarized this very well for me in a letter he wrote in the course of my exchange with him in writing this book. So we are adapted to an abandonment we've abandoned. An environment we've abandoned. An abandonment we've environed. We are adapted to an environment we have abandoned, the African savannah, and it shows. Just as it shows that we're half a chromosome away from chimpanzees. Religion looks exactly as it would look as if it was invented by such a species. Well, does this mean that without religion we'd behave better? No, it does not. I mean, I say that unbelief is not a sufficient condition, but it is a necessary one for emancipation. An atheist can be a nihilist, or a fascist, or a sadist, a relativist. It's free choice, if you like. But I do believe that you can show, almost as if along a graph, that every society that evolves along the curve of enlightenment and secularism is better off by every index of measurement we have than any society that believes itself to be a theocracy, or has ever believed itself to be. And I'll take a challenge on that from anyone here.
Well, I know that it's bound to be raised in question time, which is coming up, about Mao, Stalin, Hitler, and I think
yes.
I'm going to leave that one just to one side for a moment, because there's only time for one more question from me, and it's this. Atheism, well, let's put this the other way around. We don't expect Christian fundamentalists to describe themselves as a Darwinists. And we're still defining a moral position in relation to a set of negatives.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have something in its place. We can't simply build a position out of a set of disputes with something we want to leave behind. So what then becomes the moral fountain? What is the source? How does one proceed? Where does a shared moral set of assumptions lie, and how are they derived?
Well, on the A question first, Dr. Jonathan Miller, great, what isn't he great? He's a great opera director, he's a great physician, he's a great humorist, he's a great thinker, a great humanist. Came by not long ago and said, I don't like to call myself an atheist because I don't have a special word for not believing in the tooth fairy. I don't have a special word for not believing in Santa Claus. Why do I? And I thought at first that was rather tempting, and I thought, no. Religion was our first attempt at philosophy. It is part of our tradition. We do have to refer to the first strivings of the species to make sense of the universe and the cosmos and the nature of the species, and we have to transcend it, I would say. But we have to know it in order to do that. So there has to be a word for saying, you've gone beyond this. You don't attribute your presence here to a divine plan. They say, now you've done that, you think what? Love is a chemical reaction. You reduce humanity to a load of molecules. I say, well, as a matter of fact, love is, among other things, a chemical reaction with some quite agreeable byproducts. But it certainly, who would say it wasn't also a chemical reaction? Does this rob us of the transcendent? No. We have love, for a start, for which we do not need the permission of a celestial dictator. We have the beauty of science, which anyone here could spend a lifetime studying and marveling at without getting to the end of it. Start by a glimpse through the Hubble telescope. See if when you've seen the images you can see through that, you can turn back to the burning bush. I doubt it. We have the consolation, if you insist on the word, of philosophy. There's a great deal more consolation, stoicism, in Epicurus and Spinoza than there is in any of the holy books. We have art and music and literature. There's more morality in George Eliot or Dostoevsky or even Kafka. If you want to study ethical questions and the conflicts that arise from them, in literature, which is the proper study of mankind, to which religious books can be assimilated. We're not bereft of awe. We're not bereft of a sense of the numinous. We know how it feels to be at the edge of the Pacific on a fine evening with a sonata playing, I wouldn't trust anyone who didn't. We know how Philip Larkin felt when he wrote that poem Churchgoing that I know you and I both very much admire. I couldn't respect anyone who wouldn't think at least minimally that much. I would distrust anyone who thought any more. No, how dare they say that without them we would have no feelings, no emotions, no validity, no aesthetic. No, but we can do all this without the supernatural. We can do all this without the groveling to the dictatorship, and we can do it all without the lie that promises us that we will not, which is the source of our tragedy, and the reason why we need all these things in the first place. We will not die.
How will you honor your father's death?
How will I?
How would you, in a world that didn't have
How would I?
that ancient church, that New Testament, those well-worn, like granite worn down by water? Just leaving the truth of this to one side, is there not a very powerful and important fact? This is
Well, Ian, you don't. Yeah, I understand completely, but you don't understand how lucky I was. I mean, I was born almost the same year as you were. So still fairly secure, lower middle class England. My father had been a naval officer all his life. He, and a rather brave one, and he had the right to be buried in the D-Day chapel, beautiful chapel overlooking Portsmouth Harbour, the place which has a stained glass window for Eisenhower's prayer for good weather on the night before the invasion of Normandy. They still had to put it off by a day because the weather didn't respond to the prayer, but leave that to one side. He's buried there, and I was able to not only, as he had once carried me, carry him in on a box, and to read from St. Paul, and to receive handshakes from relatives I hadn't seen for a long time afterwards. It wasn't too bad, not a dry eye after my speech, I like to think. And I chose that bit of St. Paul because it doesn't mention God at all. It's one of the very few utterly non-religious injunctions from the ranting of his epistles. So I was very lucky. There are millions of people around the world today who wouldn't have a box to bury their parent in, or a yard of ground to find where they could do it unmolested. In Iraq, thanks to the parties of God, even on a dusty, stony road, carrying a cardboard coffin with a mutilated parent or child, you're likely to have your funeral procession, fired on by other believers. Don't be telling me that it's faith that's allowed me to bury my father with dignity. I won't have it. It's the people are being robbed of the last rag of their self-respect and their dignity all across the globe at this moment by people who believe they have divine permission to reduce the human being to a serf or an object. It's between us and them. If we don't defeat them, they fully intend to destroy us. I couldn't be more serious about this. I've never been more serious in my life.
At this point, it's your turn. Do we have some house lights?
Oh, no. I don't want to
lights?
see them looking at me, no. No, I'll take my chances. It's dazzling enough as it is, actually.
I'm assured that the acoustics in this theatre are so brilliant that we don't need a roving mic. I can't see a thing, but is there a raised hand? There's one here in the front.
I won't take these roads as any evidence of anything other than total disinterest in this question, but you mentioned, you singled out monotheism for criticism earlier when you were talking about the Holy Land and the conflicts there, and I wonder if you think that polytheism is any less worthy of your scorn.
There's a wonderful remark in a novel by Peter de Vries. Anyone here read Peter de Vries? That's a pity. Look him up if you can. Great minor American novelist, New Yorker writer, brought up in the Dutch Reformed Church in Chicago, able to write both comedy and tragedy. The Blood of the Lamb is his great tragic novel. Mackerel Plaza is his great comic one. Once asked what his ambitions were as a writer, said, to have a mass audience big enough for my elite audience to despise. Slight digression, but in Slouching Towards Kalamazoo, he wrote a lot about religion. He'd been very deeply steeped in it and was getting away, and wrote a number of books about religion. Slouching Towards Kalamazoo, he says, in one of the discussions, people used to be polytheists and believe in lots of gods, and then they became monotheists and believe in only one. They're getting nearer to the true figure all the time. I don't know as much about Hinduism as I could know, but I do know that it also has the doctrine of hell, and is one of the ones, in fact, that may have originated the idea, that its extreme votaries in India take an extremely chauvinist view of their fellow citizens, whether unbeliever or Muslim, that they've been responsible for the most appalling atrocities. And I do find that those who, those in the West who are through with the churches in which they were brought up have found those to be empty and unsatisfying. Who go east for spiritual satisfaction usually come back disappointed, and I think I know why. I'll give you an example. It's not a monotheistic one exactly, it's because it's to Buddhism, but in Cambodia recently they finally got going the trials for the genocide committed by the Khmer Rouge in the 70s. It's taken a long time to get anything like justice going and so on. The Buddhist party in the state says there's no point in these trials because all the people killed by the Khmer Rouge did something wrong in a previous life. This is not moral teaching. Zen Buddhism was the official ideology of Hirohito's army. Hirohito, being a self-proclaimed god, bowed to by the Buddhists. You will not change the subject by moving east. The human species is exactly the same everywhere. The same illusion is present in all places and cases.
And the raised arm, there's one here.
Oh, by the way, what does the Buddhist say to the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. Wait, just quickly, part two. From his saffron robes, he produces a 10 quid bill, hands it over, and then munches away, and nothing happens. He says, what about my change? What does the hot dog vendor say back? Change comes only from within. All of Eastern religion seems to be summarized in these two banalities. I'm so sorry, sir. Or ma'am. Sir, in fact.
I was able to get a copy of your book in the States, which I read. I also read
Thank you.
Dawkins' book and two books by Sam Harris, something by Daniel Dennett. And I believe, you're right. I'm convinced, but the problem is I also believe that you're preaching to the converted. Give the terminology. Do you believe that, you think, do you have any evidence to believe that these books make any difference whatsoever? The religious nuts in the States will be enlightened by reason?
Well, you're asking me to speak in my own behalf. Was the question heard by all?
No.
Thought not. I knew you were wrong about the acoustics. The gentleman, tell me if this is a fair précis of your question, sir. The gentleman says that he's bought my book in America, plus Daniel Dennett's book, Richard Dawkins' book, Sam Harris's book. I wish you would all buy all those books too, but I want you to bear in mind that mine is very reasonably priced and available at fine stores everywhere, and in fact in the lobby afterwards, where I will only be polite to people with receipts. Haven't lived in America this long for nothing. And he says, for all this, our commercial success, are we not just preaching to the converted? Well, look, I had two ambitions for the book. One was to cheer up the atheist community in America, which is, according to all polls, the fastest growing group in the country. It's doubled in size by every measurement in the last 10 years. There are more atheists than Jews or Muslims in America now. It's not great, but it's not bad. Give them a bit of morale, tell them a few jokes, teach them to stick together and speak up. That was objective one. Objective two was inflict pain on the faithful. Get in amongst them. Now, objective two worked much better than I thought it would. I went to the South. I've insisted that my publishers not, I think I've said this before, not do the usual LA, Chicago, New York book tour. Arkansas, Louisiana, the rest of it. Huge crowds at every stop. Christianity Today website, it asked me finally if I would do a twice-weekly exchange with their champion, a guy called Douglas Wilson, who thinks that it's true that slavery is mandated by Exodus, and as a result, that's why it took Christians such a long time to condemn it, for example. Serious guy, a bit crazy. Every religious newspaper practically in the country has reviewed the book and said, mostly, well, look, we can't ignore this kind of criticism. We have to get on the stick here. Initially, I couldn't find a challenger in Georgia, but finally did find a Baptist minister and professor who met me at the Margaret Mitchell House, the Gone with the Wind Museum in Atlanta. And the museum said, can you do it twice in an afternoon because we have to have a second house. We cannot fill the place fast enough. No. When I say a zeitgeist change or attendance vendor, I mean it. It's that the faithful know that they can't have it all their own way anymore. And they're not as sure of their own beliefs as they think they are. And when you ask them to say, okay, tell me that you believe all this, in front of an intelligent audience, they as P.G. Woodhouse says, they wilt like a salted snail.
Any salted snails?
Or, as he also says, they writhe like an electric fan. Possibly his best ever metaphor.
The hand right here.
Yes, citing Freud's The Future of Evolution, you have said that religion is ineradicable.
Yes.
And in a wonderful comparison, which I think is included in the future editions of God is Not Great, you have cited Albert Camus to say that even when we think the plague is gone, there's always the risk that one day it will rise again and pursue us. And currently, we see the plague most disturbingly in its notes of jihadism. And you spoke about us needing to push back against religion. What do we have to do to push back against Islamic fundamentalism?
Should I also précis and ventriloquize that question for the... Yes. The gentleman very flatteringly says that he not only noticed that I quoted Freud's Future of an Illusion, which says that religion is ineradicable, at least it is as long as we have the fear of death, but that in later talks, which I wish I had included in the book, I say that those of you who have read Albert Camus' La Peste, The Plague, some of you have? Yes? Good. Well, if you remember at the end, the plague's over. The city of Iran has returned to some form of health, and the sun is shining again, people are out on the street. But he says, but don't forget that the rats are still down in the sewer, and that they will one day again begin to become dying and diseased and send their rats up to perish again on the streets of a free city. May they'll all come back again. You're never free from the chance that however domesticated, Ian mentioned a perfect case, Christchurch at Evensong, some jolly chap who's raising funds for Darfur and hoping that one of his gay friends will be made Bishop of Durham, and so on. Jolly good. But it's always there, waiting to recrudesce in times of crisis. And it always has the authority of these terrible Stone Age texts behind it. And the gentleman further goes on to say, well, what are we going to do about the most obvious case of this? Islamic viciousness, the people who believe they have the right to kill you if you look at them the wrong way, whose first resort is to murder and suicide, to a cult of death. Good point. I mean, after all, in the Hadith, which are considered by Islam's supporters to be as canonical legally as the Quran, it says, if someone tries to change his religion, if he's an apostate, kill him. Right? The authority of the text is with the person who says the apostate must die. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? It's also, by the way, a very good answer to those who say religion makes people behave better even if it's not true. Maybe it may be all nonsense, but at least it stops people screwing in the street and frightening the horses. No, it doesn't. It makes people do things that no morally normal person would think of doing. To condemn a novelist to death for writing a work of fiction. And to say, well, God says you've got to do it. We better get on with it. Said by a minister of a government that's in alliance with the West. Now, at a time of desperate war on the border of Afghanistan. Take it seriously. The poison is always there. The rats are always lurking. The plague is always latent. Thanks for asking. Glad to clarify that point. Seriously.
We've got time for one more question. I'm afraid. Up here. Go.
Did everyone hear the lady's question? Just as I expected. Well, she asked me this: can one visualize a movement that would take up the struggle against theocratic bullying and tyranny and murder, death cult, that was based on ideas similar to mine? This is the most tragic thing, I think, about the position that one takes. One isn't a member of a church or a movement. I mean, we know each other, fellow unbelievers, when we meet. We don't need to meet every other 7 days to reinforce our beliefs, because, we hold them fairly calmly. We don't need to keep ramming them into each other and ourselves, or in some cases, 2 or 3 times a day, or in Muslim, 5 times a day. Remind yourself, this is the crap you believe. Because if you skipped one, the whole thing might start to slide away from you. Fanaticism, in other words. No, we can't match that. That is the problem. We can't. Look at it. What chance did Galileo have, really? What chance against the Vatican? What chance did he have? We're lucky we even know his name. And the names of countless other people like him we'll never know, who were tortured to death for thinking for themselves. What chance did Spinoza have against the verminous rabbis of Afghanistan? That's good. Of Amsterdam. What chance did he have? They excommunicated him, and their excommunication and condemnation of him in effect to death was seconded by the Protestant and Catholic churches in Holland, who didn't normally concern themselves with Jewish affairs, but who knew a dangerous thinker like Spinoza when they saw. What chance did he have? None. What movement could he have joined? None. No, the great fragility of our tradition is that it does depend on the free individual and the free conscience, and can't be organized into a phalanx. But that's also its great strength, its great beauty, I would actually say. I close my book with a few words of thanks to Ian, which I'm due to repeat anyway, and with the words that actually appear on the tombstone of Sigmund Freud in Vienna. The voice of reason is quiet. The voice of reason is still, actually. But one adds, but very persistent. In that we have to repose our hope. That and the 82nd Airborne Division, to which you people are not grateful enough, because even if every member of that regiment was a snake-handling Pentecostalist, they guard you while you sleep, and they prevent the worst enemy civilization currently has from taking over any more countries. And whether